class. So now is our first time in actual production, and we've already gone through our lecture and talked about machine friction. We've talked about ingredients, hydration, mixing, and all of the processes and the steps. So now it's time to begin our hands-on work. So the first lesson that we want to go through is actually figuring out the machine friction to the machine that you're going to be using. And I think aside from two of you, most of you have a stand mixer. So this is what you're going to be using for this exercise. Now, just a moment before we actually begin, I want you to take some steps and to remember your experience in the labs when you're on campus. Sanitation is really important, organization is really important, and developing good habits is really very important while we're doing our work. So I want you to take some time to clear your space in your kitchen where you're going to be doing your work, and make sure that you have all the necessary tools and equipment that you need up front and ready for you to use. Now, when you begin our process in the lab time in your home, you're going to be receiving the ingredients that you need from us. And so you're going to have ingredients that are in proportions like this. So you'll be having these packages picked up, and you'll be having these ingredients on hand for you to perform all of your productions. So for this day's production, our practice dough, we really just need 4 ingredients, which is the most basic bread we can make: flour, salt, yeast, and water. The tools that you're going to want to have in front of you are, of course, your stand mixer. You're going to want to have your dough hook attachment. You want to have your scale so you can weigh out and mise-en-place your ingredients. And you want a good thermometer. Now, I have an infrared thermometer, but I asked you all to get a digital thermometer. All right, class, now we're back. Now we have all of our mise-en-place in front of us. And the next step I want you to do is I want you to take 3 ounces out of your main batch of water, and I want you to warm it so you can activate your yeast. Now, I just keep in mind that your yeast will die at 140 degrees, so you need to keep your activated water below 100 degrees. So I'm taking my temp, and I'm at 94, so I'm good. So I'm going to add my yeast. And give this some time to hydrate. Okay. Now, salt and yeast do not mix, and we've already talked about this in our lecture. So when you're incorporating your salt in with your flour, you want to make sure that you mix in the salt with the flour for a minute or 2, even half a minute, just to get it mixed in so it's not concentrated in any one area before you add your yeast. If you're not going to be activating your yeast, and sometimes you can use fresh yeast, you can add fresh yeast directly into a dough without having to activate it or hydrate it. Just again, make sure that the yeast isn't landing right on top of the salt that you just added into your bowl, because that will affect your fermentation. It will kill your yeast if it gets into direct contact. So let's get our mixer ready. We're going to add our dough hook to our mixer. Then we're going to add our dry flour. We're going to add our salt. We're going to raise it. And on first speed, we're going to give it a couple of turns. Then we're going to leave it on first speed for 2.5 minutes. I will be telling you how long first speed, how long second speed. These are approximations, but once you get through with your second speed, you're going to be doing some evaluating visually of your dough to see how the gluten is developing, so that you yourself can now determine whether you need to mix it longer or next time you need to mix it shorter. Now, working with yeast and doughs, there's a lot of different factors that can affect your yeast, affect fermentation, affect the gluten development, and our goal is always to make the best dough and the best bread that we possibly can. So controlling temperature is one of those skills that bakers need to have in order to make the best bread. Consistency is everything in our industry, and we need to be consistent about our breads. Because it is so easily affected, we need to control temperature everywhere we can. So that's where we're going for our desired dough temperature, and we need to find out how much heat our machine is putting out into the dough. So I'm going to start this on 1, and I'm going to add my yeast and water. You're going to mix your dough in first speed for 2.5 minutes. And then you're going to increase your speed. Add the rest of your water while you're. Okay, class, so now we've completed our 4 minutes. So we're going to take a look at our dough. And remember, we've already talked about doing the window test with the dough to see how the development of the gluten is. So that's what we're going to do. Bit of flour on your bench. Pull the dough out. Also remember that I told you, you do not ever tear or pull the dough. You don't ever want to damage the gluten. So when you're going to do the window test, you're going to take some of the dough and take some scissors and cut the dough away. And just using your hands of flour, it's going to stick to you. You're going to press it out to see how thin you can get it just by using your fingers. And what you're looking for is for it to be very smooth and very even, not to have a lot of bumps. And as I'm stretching this, I can tell that it still needs a little bit more. See how it's kind of patchy. You bring it up to the light, and you see how it's developed, and you need to make sure that you have the right development. So I'm going to put this back in and give it 1 more minute of mixing, and then we're going to evaluate it 1 more time. So I'll be right back. Okay, class, so we've now completed an extra minute on our dough. And believe it or not, 1 minute can develop a dough very much, and it can easily get overdeveloped. Now, if at any time your dough starts to look glossy, very warm to the touch, and very sticky, you've already overdeveloped the gluten and overmixed the dough. So now we're going to take the dough out. Just want to kind of give it a light dusting of flour just to keep it from sticking and easier to handle. Let's take this test 1 more time. You know, being a baker has a lot to do with feeling, touching, looking, observing everything, all the steps, being very conscious of all the steps, and sometimes you're even smelling things. So an experienced baker has seen a lot and can see a dough do a lot. So now our dough is very easily transparent and it looks good. So we're going to now take the temperature. So now we're going to go on with our machine friction calculations. So the dough temperature after the mix is what we need to put in this spot. So right now I have 73 degrees is my temperature. And I want you to make a note of how this dough feels. Feel it with your hands, how pliable it is. This is at a 70% hydration, which is pretty high. So this dough is going to be very soft and malleable. And you want to remember that, because I want you to be able to recognize and anticipate the textures of your doughs based on their hydration. So this hydration number, percentage of water, is really, really important to the type of bread. Now, we're doing all white bread flour, but if you had a combination of rye and whole wheat and bread flour, even at a 70%, texture would still feel a little different because their absorption ratio for those types of flours might vary, and we talked about that during our lecture. So these are all things that you need to kind of consider when you're making bread. So now, we have our 73, our factor is 3, and we have all of our additional temperatures. So now you're going to take your worksheet and you're going to work your numbers. So what you're going to do here is you're going to take your 73 and you're going to multiply it times 3. And that came out to 219 degrees. Then every other temperature that you have, you're going to subtract. So now we're going to subtract the room temperature, then we're going to subtract the flour temperature, then we're going to subtract the water temperature, if we had a pre-ferment in this, we would be subtracting that temperature as well. And so that, after you've subtracted all of those factors, that is going to give you your machine friction. And what we came out to here is a 4.5. That is your machine friction for this particular model, this particular quart capacity mixer. And yours might be different. So this is how you're going to determine that.